All right, today we're jumping into a huge topic in online learning, feedback. There's this one study that found a really surprising solution, and trust me, it's probably not what you're expecting.
Okay, so let's really get into this. Here's the core problem, right? We all know that good, meaningful feedback is absolutely crucial for learning anything. But if you're an instructor and you've got dozens, maybe even hundreds of online students, trying to give detailed feedback on every single thing they post, that is a one-way ticket to burnout. It's this classic problem, a real catch-22.
So you might be thinking, what's the obvious solution? Well, let the students help each other out. Get them to give feedback to their peers. It seems perfect. It saves the instructor a ton of time, and hey, it gets students talking to each other. But a group of researchers at Purdue University had a big question. They wanted to know, is peer feedback just, a convenient shortcut, or is it actually as good as getting feedback from the expert in the room? So they decided to put it to the test. And to figure this out, they set up this really clever experiment inside a graduate-level online course. Let's break down exactly how they did it.
Okay, so first things first, the instructor showed everyone what great feedback actually looks like. They set the standard. Then, every week, each student had to review 2 of their classmates' posts. And they weren't just guessing, they used a really clear rubric that was based on Bloom's taxonomy, which is basically just a way to measure different levels of thinking. Now, here's the really important part. The instructor would collect all that feedback, take all the names off of it to make it anonymous, and then send it out. That anonymity was absolutely key, right? It meant everyone could be totally honest without worrying.
All right, now this is where things get really interesting, because a super fascinating disconnect started to show up. The researchers were looking at 2 different things. First, the hard data, how well the students were actually doing. And second, how the students felt about the whole thing. And believe me, the results told 2 completely different stories.
So the first big finding was, honestly, pretty striking. Just look at these numbers. The average quality of the student work with feedback from the instructor was 1.31, and with peer feedback, 1.33. Statistically, that's basically the same thing. There was no real difference. What that tells us is that peer feedback was just as good as instructor feedback at keeping the quality of work high. The learning didn't take a hit. Not one bit. So, that's it then, right? Problem solved. If the quality of the work was the same, the students must have loved it. It works. Case closed. Well, not so fast. And here is the twist in the story. Even though the data proved that peer feedback was working just fine, the students themselves, they still wanted feedback from the instructor. By a long shot. They just saw the professor as the expert, the final word. So even though their classmates' feedback was clearly helping them do good work, they just trusted the instructor's opinion way more. So this brings up a huge question. If the people getting the feedback didn't really value it, was the whole thing a failure? Not at all. Because what the study found next was the real game changer. It turns out the biggest, most powerful benefit of peer feedback wasn't for the person getting it. It was for the person giving it. This quote from one of the students in the study just nails it. It turns out that the simple act of evaluating someone else's work, that's where the real deep learning was actually taking place. And this, right here, was the most profound and honestly, the most unexpected discovery of the whole study. The researchers have a name for this. They call it the giver's gain. And it makes so much sense when you think about it. To give somebody good feedback, you can't just skim their work. No way. You have to really analyze it. You have to compare it against the rules in the rubric. You got to reflect on what's good and what's not so good. And then you have to explain why you gave the score you did. That whole process, it forces you to engage with the material on a way deeper level, and that in turn makes your own understanding of the topic so much stronger. And you know what? The students totally picked up on this themselves. They started reporting that because they were evaluating other people's work, they became way more thoughtful and critical about their own posts. It was like holding up a mirror. It helped them see their own work in a new light and brought all the main ideas from the course into what they called greater focus. Okay, so this is all great, but how do we actually use this information? How can we design a peer feedback system that really leans into this giver's gain? Well, the good news is, the study gives us a pretty clear playbook. The research boils it down to 7 key principles. First up, you have to explain the why. Tell students that the real benefit is for them, the person giving the feedback. Second, you've got to model what good feedback looks like. Third, provide crystal clear guidelines and rubrics so everyone's on the same page. It's also super important to monitor the whole process. Make sure it stays anonymous and try to get multiple students to review each assignment for a more balanced take. And finally, keep it simple. The text should be easy to use so that all the brainpower goes into the thinking, not fighting with the software. So let's wrap up with this final thought. We usually think of feedback as this gift that we get from an expert, right? Something we just receive. But what if the biggest value isn't in the getting, but in the giving? What if we started to reframe feedback not as a gift, but as an exercise? Like a workout for your brain that builds your critical thinking muscles, because all the evidence from this study suggests that's where the real magic is hiding.